Hi everyone, welcome to All Things Iceland, the place to get the inside scoop on Icelandic nature, culture, history, and language. My name is Jules, and today, like the title says, I'm going to be sharing as honestly as I can, without naming any companies or individual names, about my experience of working in Iceland. I've had overall a good experience, but of course there have been challenging things that have come up over the last 4+ years, and I'm going to be sharing all of the insights I can. Of course, this is my experience, so it's going to be different than somebody else. Some people might relate to what I'm sharing, some might not. That's okay. Before I jump into it though, make sure that you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on future insightful videos like this, especially since I'm getting a lot of requests around videos about how to find a job in Iceland, how to move to Iceland, and those types of videos are coming up in the future. I think it might be helpful to note that I've been working in a corporate environment in Iceland, so not off in nature as a guide or any of those experiences, maybe like working in a restaurant. So I can't speak to that. And also the companies that I worked for have their own unique parts to them, meaning I worked for a travel agency and I also worked for a advertising agency. While they're very different places to work, there were also a lot of similarities, which is not terribly surprising after you hear what I have to talk about. As I started reflecting on my work experience here in Iceland, I realized that it might be helpful for you and me to kind of separate the experiences up. So I have a category which is like delightful / surprising, and then another category which has to do with the challenges I faced here. So regarding surprising / delightful things that I encountered in Iceland, I want to start off with the working environment, meaning like how the places physically look. And I was really fortunate that in both places, the office themselves were decorated in such a cool way. Like in the agency that is a tourism agency, it would been created or designed to look like being in a cabin. So kind of like similar wood as you're seeing behind me. There was a tent hanging upside down on the ceiling. There was like these cozy chairs and benches that had been made from leftover driftwood and like different things. It was just like, there was a lot of thought that had been put into how the office was designed, and the same for the advertising agency. Lots of colors, super creative spaces, and kind of like brightened up your day just like walking into the office. And when I worked in the United States, it was not like that. Obviously there are companies in the US that do this, but it was just kind of fascinating to me that I was like actually like excited about going to work just because the space itself was super interesting. So along with the fact that the environment, literally like the way the place was designed was really cool for both offices, it also was that it felt like it was a lot more laid back. And in my last video, when I talked about like 5 habits of Icelandic people that I've picked up after these years, being more casual is definitely something that's just kind of feels like it's in the DNA here. So in the offices themselves, it didn't really feel like I was always walking into like this super stressful place. Granted, people were doing a lot of work. There were times people were definitely stressed, but it just had this kind of air of more laid back. And it varied in terms of how people dressed, because when you're working in a like tourism agency, for instance, it's way more casual than an agency. However, there wasn't like, at least in my mind, didn't feel like this really strict dress code. Just as long as if you were going to meet clients, then you looked appropriate for that, and you know, whatever that meant. So for the most part, the environments themselves felt quite welcoming, and that was a nice surprise. On top of that, Iceland is very kid-friendly, and it surprised me a lot that there is a kids corner in a lot of places where people work. And that literally means like a area that is set up so if a person or people in the office had to bring their child to work, they could do that. And when I first remember like starting my job, the tourism agency, that was the first one that I had, I literally walked into the company and I saw an area that was like a little bench area, and it had some toys and some books, and there was a TV across from it. And I was like, oh, that's odd. There's a, kid who left their toys at the job. Like, it didn't dawn on me that this was specifically set up for children. Like, those are just like community toys the kids could play with. And it wasn't until I saw a couple of people needing to bring their kid in because maybe kindergarten hadn't started yet, or maybe the kid wasn't feeling so well. And of course, this is pre-COVID, so people could do this without fear of like spreading, some type of virus. But in this particular time frame, it was very common for people to bring their kid in. And I was just astonished by this. Like, this would have not been allowed in any other places that I worked at. You just had to have figured it out, or you would have felt so terrible if you had to bring your kid in, meaning like feeling super guilty. And granted, most of the time the kids were quiet, but there were often times where the kids were like running, talking, the TV might have been a little bit loud, and people were just like going about their day, doing their thing, being understanding. It wasn't like it happened every day, all day long. So, and also a lot of people in the office had children, or they had gone through that phase with their kids where they needed these types of accommodations. For me, it was just like a big culture shock to see that, because there wasn't much judgment around it. And there was a whole lot of acceptance of like, kids, if you have them, which many people do here, they're a part of your life, and your work and your kids can't always be separate. Like, there needs to be allowed time for this. And on top of that, even when it came to sick days, I remember seeing like when you were able to log your sick days, you can either say that you were sick or your kid was sick. And it was like, that is interesting too, Like, I don't know how it works with like how many days, if you get days off for having a sick kid. I'm not really aware of that. I never looked into that part for the unions. But still, like, the idea that like some companies, at least the ones that I've been at, have like made that distinction between you yourself being sick or your child, and that time is different than, of course, your days off for vacation. So regarding unions, as I just mentioned, that was like one of the biggest surprises, and definitely became so delightful, because once I understood the benefits that came along with being in a union, it was like, yes, this is amazing. So in Iceland, there are unions for all different types of professions, but everyone falls into a union somewhere for the most part, as far as I know. And that was surprising, because I wasn't used to everyone getting a possibility to be part of a union. Because in the US, it isn't like that, unfortunately. And as I've mentioned in other videos, that you do have unions for certain professions, just not for everybody. So the union that I'm part of has benefits like being able to get a really good deal on accommodations. In fact, they have their own accommodations that are available, like cabins and things like that in the countryside that you can rent. They have a contingency fund that you can use if you want to go to the gym, and they help pay for that, or just to use it for whatever that is different than, say, if you want to get education, there's a different fund. So the amount that you are contributing to the union each month, they take portions of that and put that into a contingency fund for you, a vocational education / fund. And it also allows, because there are a big group of people in it, for them to provide other types of benefits. This was just the coolest. And I've been actually using those benefits. I let them pile up over some years, and I've started to use them more recently. And it's worth it. Like, they've helped to pay for this Icelandic course that I'm currently taking in Ísafjörður, because that's where I am right now. And actually on Patreon, the All Things Iceland Patreon community, I'm going to be giving the full scoop on those courses and like my honest review and all those things. And it's helped pay for like accommodations, all this stuff that I would have had to pay out of pocket in the United States. And as I mentioned, of course, working here, there's a lot of taxes that are taken out. But for me, it feels like the taxes that go towards healthcare, the dues that I pay for the union, it feels worth it, because the benefits that I'm getting back from it help improve my quality of life. And also regarding time off, which is something that I alluded to with the kids and having sick days, I have not ever had less than 4 weeks of vacation, and I didn't feel guilty taking that vacation. So this is another like fascinating thing to me, and conversations that I've had with people here in Iceland. And I would say, like, you know, it was uncommon for people, even if they had all 10 days in the United States to take, that they would feel uncomfortable taking all of them together because the workload would be put on your fellow employees, or you might be made, you know, to feel bad about it from your boss or whatever. And I remember my bosses being like, oh, really? And I'm not saying that like it isn't hard for people to do this, but here it's like people would take a month vacation, they would take 6 weeks vacation, and of course these are people who've been working a long time, they've accumulated a lot more days, so maybe they might have started off with a certain amount of weeks of vacation, and then as they've been with the company for quite a while, they've gathered a lot, like they've gained more privilege to, you know, extra vacation days. And to them, taking a month off of vacation, which is not necessarily all of their vacation, it's like, of course, yes, I would do that, right? And like, to me, it was like, what? Well, this person's leaving for that long? Like, at first, I was afraid of taking much longer than 2 weeks. And I was often encouraged to be like, yeah, you do need to take time off. And I'm not just saying like from my boss or anything, but from people in the company who felt like this is something that is worth it because you need to recharge, but also this is how we do it here. So, and you have that time and you don't want to like lose it at the end of the year, so make sure that you use it. That was like, whoa, okay, I'm going to New York, I'm going like all these different places, and I felt a sense of relief that I didn't have to worry about knowing that I'm taking off 3 weeks and like no one's getting mad at me. There's just adjustments that are made. Of course, I have to do a lot of things leading up to that, and getting back afterwards, it's, you know, a bunch of stuff to do. But I appreciated the time where I could just cut off from being at work and enjoy my vacation. And because a lot of people worked together or have worked together for so long, the environments that I've been in felt like family. Like it just felt like to the point where, and a lot of times there were families working in the company. And in fact, one of them, there were 4, if not 5 couples working in the same place. And I am not used to that whatsoever. And my brain immediately went to like, oh, what if there's gonna be drama? Like, what if all this stuff? And it's like, it really wasn't, as far as I know, it wasn't a problem. To be fair, I'm also allergic to drama, as I like to say. So I stayed out of people's business. If they weren't getting along, I don't wanna know about it. But the whole point is, for the most part, it didn't feel like drama, even though there were a lot of couples working together. And I was just like, wow. You know, it's often thought of as being a negative thing to be with your partner all day long and then you go home with them. I'm not saying it isn't for some people, but in these instances, I found it really fascinating that there were, you know, kids from individuals that worked there, which of course some people might feel is nepotism, and they're probably right, I don't know. But still, that was the case. And then couples that worked together. But also because a lot of these people worked so long together, maybe 10, 15 years, maybe they went to school together, maybe they're actually relatives, like distant cousins or stuff, they knew each other. So there was this camaraderie, this family-like atmosphere that I was entering into that I found really nice, because it gave this extra like meaning to when we were celebrating holidays, birthdays. There was a yearly company party, and I'm pretty sure most, if not all, companies in Iceland do this. It's called Árshátíð, which literally means yearly festival. And it's a huge party that the company has. And some companies in Iceland, at least when people could travel, they would go out of the country, like to Morocco, like all these like crazy places, and just have a huge party and celebrate the year. So that is something that's pretty regular here and part of their working environment. On top of that, there were these interesting perks in the office that you had to pay for yourself that I never encountered before, such as getting massages. And I don't mean like some, you know, random kind of creepy person in the office comes up and starts massaging people, but actually a hired masseuse that comes in on certain days of the week, and people can sign up and you pay that person directly, and you would get maybe 20 to 25 minute massage. in the office during the workday. And it was totally accepted and encouraged, you know, especially if you hadn't tried it. I remember people like, oh, by the way, we get massages, so make sure you sign up. This guy's really good. And it was just like, this is so fascinating, you know, like this is totally different than anything I'm used to doing or like expecting of being in the office. There was even one place where I worked, the first one, where we had a personal trainer. So a guy who was interning at the office, he actually is a personal trainer as well. And once a week or twice a week during lunch, a bunch of people in the office would go down and train with him. And the company would pay for that so that we could have a half an hour to an hour of training. Again, everyone was like really into it. The people that wanted to do it, were a part of it, and those that didn't, that was totally fine. In addition to that, which, like I said, a lot of this was like surprising all at once, is that we had this employee membership club, which was in essence, you pay a small fee, maybe like $15 a month, but collectively, kind of like the way the union is, but in a different way here, is that we could do activities together. So we could go for happy hour, we did archery, we went hiking, kayaking, like all these fun activities. Granted, I was part of a tourism agency, so they're a lot more creative when it comes to outdoor things, mainly because a lot of them are just like hardcore outdoor people. And this introduced me to a lot of beautiful Icelandic nature, and I got to know my coworkers really well. So like I mentioned, this family feeling was just amazing and slightly bizarre because I never really was that close to my coworkers in the US. Like I feel like, especially in New York City, we're all just going in, doing our jobs. Sometimes you go out for happy hour, but a lot of these other activities I was doing in Iceland, these are things that I would do maybe with closer friends. But now I just was like doing them with people who were essentially strangers, but were becoming close to me because we're having the opportunity to bond in really unique ways. One thing that surprised me and only later on delighted me about some of the like working environment in Iceland is that some people would leave early in the day in the summer if the weather was really good, or in the winter if it was like a good snow day so they can go skiing or something. And it wasn't something that people really bat an eyelash about. They were like, yeah, the weather's really good, you should go outside and use it, and that's a very Icelandic mentality that was kind of transferred over into the working environment. People here still do work a lot, and I'm not saying that everybody works long hours, but like I know for myself, I found myself working a lot of long hours. And when I first got here, I had very much this kind of like New York tunnel vision mentality where I couldn't understand. Like it was like, okay, yeah, it's sunny outside. But of course, if you're coming from a place where in the summer you get consistent summer weather, then I didn't think anything special about like, it's a sunny day. It wasn't until I realized that the weather can be so bad during the summer that you have to take advantage of these days that I understood that, okay, people are at work, but the weather's good today. We're leaving, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying like you didn't get your work done, but this kind of idea, like maybe the weather's good today and tomorrow it's not as good. So you do what you need to do today, and then maybe if you can hold off for doing some other stuff tomorrow, you do, and you leave a little bit early and you enjoy the sunshine, you enjoy if there's no wind, something like that. And this was just like bizarre. It was only after the horrendous summer that we had in 2018 that it sunk in that I was like, oh yeah, I'm never going to sacrifice a lovely day again just for work, right? Like it was just like, and I was thinking to myself like, who am I? What am I becoming? But I love it. I'm so surprised at how amazing it is to just be like, no, we have to go and use this weather today because it's probably going to not last. And why would you want to miss this opportunity? One of my favorite delightful moments is that I got to learn a lot about Icelandic culture in the office, because there are, different holidays that are coming up and people get really excited about that here. And I love the fact that, for instance, just as an example, during Christmas time, there were clementines that people would buy and have in the office to eat. So for me, it was like, it's nice that we have clementines, but I didn't see it as like some special thing. It's just, in New York City, you probably get clementines all year because they're being shipped in from whatever country, but the significance of it is that back in the day, when some of the people that I worked with were younger, it was hard to get clementines in Iceland. So this was a treat they would get during Christmas. So I ended up learning all these like really cultural significant things to Icelanders because I worked in an office where people like took this seriously and they wanted, even though it's not like being exactly at home, but they feel like family, so they want to have these moments that they kind of similarly have with their families. So I really loved that. It was a fun surprise to just get all these tidbits of cultural information. So the last surprising thing that I'm going to mention that caught me off guard in a good way is that even though Iceland has been touted for being a country where it's equal between men and women, the country's not still there yet, especially when it comes to pay. And so there is this gender gap when it comes to salaries for doing the same job. And it's not across all sectors. I mean, there was a law that was passed that made it illegal for this to be the case, that there is a gender pay gap if a woman is doing the same job as a man but getting paid less. So every year, in order to bring attention to this gender pay gap, women walk out of the office at the time that, say like if it was 3:45 and work normally ends at 5 o'clock, but because the gender pay gap is at that point where technically that's how much a woman is getting paid less, is that she's working that extra hour and 15 minutes, women would walk off the job at 3:45 p.m. We'd go to a march in Oystervöllur, which is this square in downtown Reykjavik, and we hear like speeches from individuals, all this stuff. What surprised me is that in both companies I've worked in, that the bosses have, or at least, higher up individuals in these companies have sent around messages saying, I encourage you to walk off the job and go to these demonstrations in like support of this closing the gender pay gap. And I was like, that is so interesting. Okay. Granted, these companies had been really working hard, so they don't feel like they're the ones who are the problem, and they want to help support and bring attention to maybe in other industries or companies where there is a gender pay gap. But I was definitely not expecting that. I mean, you would think there would be like resistance, and I have heard of some people where their bosses were maybe giving them a hard time, but like I mentioned, this is my experience, and that wasn't the case. I was encouraged, and I was just like, that is so cool. You're telling me to leave work. Granted, like I mentioned, great cause, but so yeah, that was just, it still kind of, makes me realize that there's just so much difference in culture here. So those are my surprising / delightful things that I've noticed I wanted to share. Next up, we're going to talk about the challenges. Even though I've had a really good experience, I think it would be totally unfair if I didn't bring out the parts of working in Iceland, at least for me, that were just difficult, basically. I mean, I'm calling them challenges, but there were difficulties that weren't and haven't still been super easy. And I'll dive kind of into ones that have to do with like overall in some of these companies that I've noticed. And that has to do with organization. So really kind of like being organized about and methodical, strategic, those types of words about doing things. Like I mentioned, it's not that every company in Iceland is like this. I'm only mentioning the ones that I've been with because it's hard, because I'm a person who likes to have things organized. And I mean like kind of having a good idea strategically of where we want to go, really setting out some milestones, and then tracking how we're getting there. So using tools in order to see that, looking at trends that are developing, understanding our customers really well. And to be fair, the companies that I've been with, the reason why I was hired was to help with this. And so that was great, and I'm not knocking that. I mean, obviously if you realize that you need it and then you hire someone or people to do that, that's awesome. But it was often that shiny object syndrome, or kind of getting a feeling about something and going in a totally different direction, like that would happen often. Or even just forgetting about the fact that we talked about focusing on a specific set of goals so that we can see if it worked or not, like all the things we were doing. And that has been super hard for me, because you feel like you're in a place where we've written up a plan and maybe there hadn't been a plan before, not a solid strategy around what it is that we wanted to accomplish, really concrete goals with numbers and where numbers were appropriate or possible, and also following through with implementation, right? And at the end, reviewing and making sure. So that process, I don't think overall is as appealing, at least in the places that I've worked, mainly because it was like, okay, we're doing this thing, we've got this plan, and then not even always like halfway through it, it'd be like, well, we said we were gonna focus specifically on like these types of customers, these people, but wouldn't it be amazing if we started doing this? And it's like, it could, but it would, like, the budget, like we planned a budget around this specific activity or the specific type of products that we want to promote, and we would then have to take budget, because we're not going to get budget from anywhere else. The money just doesn't come out of the sky, and use it for that. So now we're like totally stretching and we're really having a hard time reaching the goals that we originally set out for, or those get put to the side. And then later on, it's like when we're doing a review, it's like, well, this, and this happened. And inevitably it's life too, in terms of why some of this stuff happens. But there was also a lot of, okay, the competition is doing this, and focusing a lot on what the competition is doing, and not always kind of just being our own entity that separates itself from the pack. And of course, that was tough sometimes to swallow when you realize that, oh, this is either taking too long to get approved sometimes, or it sounds good and it was written down, but there hasn't, like, maybe the commitment isn't completely there, because there are habits that have been formed before I got there, before anybody else got there, that might have been, new to this place, and you have to step back a little bit. Like I had to like really like take myself out of my ego, first of all, of course, but also the fact that this is a culture I need to understand. So I, over time, learned my own ways of being able to deal with this and still kind of, help move things along. But it felt really tedious a lot of the time and not as strategic as it could have been, which means that we maybe weren't always effective as we could have been in terms of meeting goals, or, being able to attract different people customer-wise that would be most ideal, or even messaging, like all of this stuff. So I'm just putting that out there as like, if you're coming from a place where maybe there's a lot of numbers driven or strategic driven type of work, especially in the US. I mean, the US, when it comes to digital marketing in particular, which is the field that I'm in, they are definitely leaps and bounds beyond what most companies are doing in Iceland, if not all of them, because there's just been a lot of development in this space, and there's also tons of tools available and conferences and things like that. So that made it a challenge for me to have to realize that you're in a new place. Of course, you have to work along with how people do things, but how it's presented, meaning like what we say we want to do and how we act, can sometimes be two totally different things. And just being conscious of that. It can make you frustrated and easily annoyed. And I know many people who have gotten that way. I've gotten that way myself, until I realized that I needed to just have a different approach because it was either that or just don't be there, right? Like that's part of what I think is necessary to understand about yourself. Like what is most important for you in terms of comfortability at a place, and if it aligns with how you do work. Another challenging thing is, because I was so excited about working in Iceland, especially in my first job, and then after when I moved to the next one, there's always this idea of like, of course, wanting to do well and show up and like stay long hours and stuff. And as I mentioned before, there were some days at least in the beginning when people were like, it's a beautiful day outside, we're leaving, you should leave too. And I didn't understand that, but I did find myself, because I was also like a foreigner, and you just wanted, like, this was my way of kind of contributing, because I didn't speak the language. Like I'm much better at Icelandic now, and I'm working on getting my command language to be much stronger. But in the beginning, I hardly understood, most of the stuff that was being said. So my way of feeling like I belonged and contributing was really like digging in there and working a lot. I almost to the point where I was overworking and close to burning out in both places. So this was super hard because I know that a lot of people, especially in the first company I worked for, they were like, it's okay, you can take it easy. And it was a lot more relaxed. Once moving over to an agency, it's like things are coming at you everywhere. There's a ton of work you can do all the time. There are a lot of different clients and exciting opportunities, blah, blah, blah. And it was just like, whoa, like I was like tail spinning because in my mind, it was so excited. And what was challenging is that, like I mentioned, because I'm not within these circles of people who kind of sometimes feel like family, and like I mentioned, some of them are, that I felt the need to almost like overdo it at times. And I already have a, kind of a workaholic tendencies. So this was easy for me to get myself trapped into. And on top of that is like, there are daily reminders, of course, that you are not understanding the language, because the meetings, most of the meetings, whenever we had huge meetings, there'd be in Icelandic. And that meant, of course, sitting sometimes for an hour, listening to someone speak in Icelandic, even if they had slides and you're just like, okay. You're like, your eyes glaze over and you're there physically, but your brain has melted out of your ear. That's how it felt for me. Anyway, so tired, so out of it afterward. And especially the first like year and a half, 2 years, I was just, it was so difficult getting these emails in Icelandic. And of course, this makes sense, why this happens. These are companies where people, their native tongue we're in Iceland, right? And they speak Icelandic. So my way of trying to then get on board with that was, even though I'd work a lot, I would still take some Icelandic courses after work. So being in a full-time job and taking courses, as anybody knows, some of you out there who are watching this might be in that situation or have been in that situation, it is a lot. And especially when you're doing something that now your brain has not encountered this type of information before. So learning a language that isn't like English enough for you to just kind of pick it up more easily, and there's a lot more grammar involved that is unusual and not that I've ever had to use before. So this posed a lot of challenges in terms of having work-life balance, because if I had the language already down, then there wouldn't be as much of a problem, right? I could just do my work and then do other activities outside of work. But I felt such a huge obligation to learn that stress was added on top of the stress of already working. So as a foreigner, that was hard. And as a person that just wanted to feel like they fit in, it was part of the company culture and understanding what was going on. You also usually don't want to be that person when you're in the meeting, because they always say, if you don't understand anything, let us know. And it's like, I want to be the person every 2 seconds being like, so what's that word? Like, you just, all of those words, what are those words, right? Like, you don't want to be that person. So normally what you would do is go like, I'll wait. And to be fair, a lot of the times after meetings, they would give a summary in English of the meeting. Like I said, if it had been an hour meeting, you're probably getting like 10 to 15 minutes afterwards in English. So you're not getting everything, and you're missing a whole lot, and the jokes and all this stuff. So challenging. Not having the language is handicapping, basically, in some ways. Now granted, obviously you can get jobs. I got jobs. I've been working continuously in Iceland, so that isn't an issue all the time. But being a part of this community in the company without having Icelandic, like during lunch or whatever else, you definitely feel like an outsider. And even like as I've been learning the language, I remember going to lunch and sitting in the lunchroom with everybody else, and I'm sitting at a table and everyone's speaking Icelandic, but because I'm needing to think a lot harder in order to understand, I'm just watching people, right? So people are talking, and then they kind of like feel a little awkward because I'm like watching their lips while they're talking, and like it's just like kind of like a creepy person at the table. And I was like, oh God. But you know, this is a part of it. However, even though I know it's a part of it, it doesn't make it any less challenging. It's still difficult to know that you have this disadvantage or lack of knowledge, especially at a level when it comes to like deep conversations or expressing yourself, telling jokes and whatever else. In the first company that I worked for, one of the hardest things was being the only American in the office for a long time. And I moved in 2016 in June. So in November, that's when the current president of the United States was elected. And the amount of questions that I got about why this person was elected, how could this happen? You know, I mean, I was asking the same questions too, right? But I'm getting that question because in essence, I'm like representing the United States in some way because I'm from there. And that was so difficult because I was just like, I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out. And, you know, I don't feel good about it either. And it was just so intense to have these types of conversations. And especially now we have the pandemic and Black Lives Matter, and both those situations are being handled horribly in the United States. There's a lot of questions that pop up, and my initial reaction is, of course, to just like shut it out and not want to have these conversations. But I realized that like people are interested because they know that it's a different culture, so maybe I might have some insight. So I do my best to try to explain. It has changed, especially over the years I've been here, like meeting other people from the United States. I've worked with them, so we all can like kind of talk about what's going on and feel some camaraderie and being able to, you know, each of us take on different questions because yeah, it's hard when you're the only one. It wasn't to fault anyone in Iceland that asked, but more of it was hard for me personally to come up with explanations. I would try my best, but often it was just like, you know, your guess is as good as mine. Let's just sit here and have a conversation as to the possibilities. The other kind of funny thing here that I'm not used to at all is the jokes in the office can sometimes be crude or what would be considered inappropriate in the US. And that part it's a part of Icelandic humor. There's a lot of like dark humor, but there's also a lot of jokes about like body parts, let's just say. And I'm not saying about like an individual person like pointing at their body, but like incorporating these types of jokes. And it's just like, this is so weird, you know? And I was sort of used to these types of jokes because my husband grew up making them and he thinks a lot of them are funny. When they're like not trying to like violate anybody, of course, or to make anyone feel bad, just kind of like an in general joke. So I was used to kind of knowing that this is a part of Icelandic humor for some people, but I wasn't expecting it to be in the office. And I remember like hearing some people say things and I was like, am I gonna get in trouble? Like this is, you know, this is not borderline, this is already over the line. The line hasn't been obliterated, right? But no one really seemed to care. And I wasn't offended by it, so I was just like, okay. But in terms of challenging, like, I only said, okay, when I got to a comfortable place with knowing that it was happening in the office. Like, beforehand, meaning like the first year or something, I was like, ugh, kind of cringy, you know? And gonna find out, like, when I've worked with other people from the United States, we'd all kind of get this. And this is probably due to the fact that there's a lot different ideas about what's considered appropriate or inappropriate. As I mentioned in the surprise slash delight category, when it comes to being more casual, this is definitely part of it. So if you're not used to that, you might find yourself doing this type of like in your brain calculating of like, should I be offended by this? Is this wrong? You know, is this something messed up here? But overall, in the end, like I mentioned, I didn't have a negative experience with that, but I still think it has the ability to challenge me because those aren't the jokes that I normally make. I can find some of them funny, but most of the time I'm just like, okay, you know, I'm just talking about something else now. So Those are at least the things that come to mind for me when I think about surprising, delightful, and challenging. I really hope that you found this information to be helpful, and if you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with anyone that you know who's interested in possibly moving and working in Iceland, because there are some good insights I think that will help people who are interested in this. I am planning to make videos about how to find a job in Iceland, moving to Iceland, all that stuff. So don't worry, that stuff is coming your way. Along with doing these videos, I also have a podcast called All Things Iceland, in which I do interviews with native Icelanders, expats. I give information about the history, culture, language, and nature of this awesome country. And it's a great place to get even more insight. It's totally different content than what I'm doing on my YouTube channel or even on Instagram. So I encourage you to check that out. The link to it will be in the description box below. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.